glad that you guys are here. Thanks for joining us again for another 2-to-1 marriage ministry session. Today is very special because we have a super great collaboration with Joined at the Hip Marriage Ministry. Hey, Mike and Erica.
Hello.
Hey, why don't you guys give us a brief introduction into who you are? I know you've been on with us before, but tell the people who you are and what you're about.
Okay, well, my name is Michael. This is my beautiful wife, Erica, and we are joined at the Hip Marriage Ministry. We've been doing ministry for about 6-7 years now. The reason why we started our ministry, because we were looking for something more out of the box approach to marriage ministry. We looked around. We wanted to go to a marriage retreat, but everything we saw was kind of stale in our opinion. You know, it was more of a structured seminar lecture style of retreat, and we wanted to do something different. So we created Join at the Hip. We got a group of our friends together and we booked our own retreat and hosted it ourselves. And God has been blessing us ever since. We've done so many different types of outreach events, fundraisers. We just had an unplugged Sabbath here at our country retreat property here. And so God is definitely moving, and we're so happy and excited to be with you guys today.
Thanks for having me. Well, thanks, guys.
Unplug was awesome, by the way. We can attest to that. We were there, and it was really great. And we're so glad to be in such great company. This is an awesome couple to know. They believe in what they say in God-fearing, love-based marriages. And so we're glad to be in their company today. So my name is Kasha Gordon. For those who don't know us, this is my loving husband, Clamore Gordon, and we are a part of 2-to-1 Marriage Ministry in partnership with Connect Orlando, a nonprofit based in Orlando, Florida, although we've been virtual for a lot of this year and last year. So we're glad to have this opportunity to partner with you all. Let's go ahead and get started. We were talking about this month's session, and we believed it's really important. We've dealt with this in the workplace. We talk about it in our family, and we thought how important it is in relation to marriage. We're talking about emotional intelligence today. Emotional intelligence, which is often abbreviated as EQ in marriage, and what that looks like. So let's start out by giving a little definition for those who may not be as familiar with the terminology. Maybe you haven't delved really deeply into this before. Let's talk about what it is, and then let's talk a little bit about how this applies to marriages and why it's even important. So when we think about how the brain processes information, we take in all of our senses first through the spinal cord in the back of our brain. So everything that we smell, think, taste, it all starts, our sensory starts from here. And interestingly, it passes through the limbic system, which is where we feel. Right? That's where our feelings, we process our feelings and emotions. And then it goes to the frontal lobe, which is where we process more logically. But sometimes things tend to get a little stuck in the limbic system, and we tend to just be feelings-based and make feelings-based decisions. So in order for us to make rational decisions or have a blend of the two, it involves emotional intelligence. So that is what brings us to our conversation today. Now, when we talk about intelligence, which is often abbreviated as IQ, that is our ability to learn. I know there's a lot of assessments that exist out there on IQ, your intelligence quotient. And so, but that's something that tells your ability to learn, whereas emotional intelligence, that's actually a flexible skill that can be learned over time. That is something that you can hone and develop, right? And then your personality is the third part that makes up who we are. So we have our intelligence, our emotional intelligence, and our personality. It's kind of the three phases of our makeup. When we talk about emotional intelligence, we look at it in 4 quadrants. And those 4 quadrants, or those 4 areas that make up EQ, are your self-awareness, your self-management, your social awareness, and your relationship management. So to go through those very briefly one by one, the first thing is your self-awareness. And that looks at, okay, what are my triggers? What are the things that I most often respond to, whether it's positively, negatively, and really stopping to think about why those things are triggering. Why does this type of conversation make me so happy? Why does this response by this person make me so upset? Self-awareness, that's the first quadrant. Thinking about your triggers and why they happen, how often they happen. And then it moves into self-management. Once you become aware of what your triggers are, positive and negative, what makes you tick, quote unquote, what gets you going, what cooks your grits, if you're from the South, I like to say that. Then what you do about it is your self-management. So now that I'm aware of my triggers, how do those things play out every day in my actions? Am I aware enough to stop and think, okay, when I experience this trigger, here's how I need to respond. What I do about it is my self-management. So once I know now who I am, what my triggers are, and now what I'm doing about them, I can move into social awareness. Now, when I'm in social settings with another person or a group of people, I can learn to start reading the room. I'm observing social cues. How does someone respond to my reactions? How does someone respond to my words? Are people happy when I'm around? Do people look uncomfortable when I say certain things? That's that social awareness, learning to read the room, looking at social cues. And then finally, once I know who I am, I know what I'm doing about it, then I understand how to read the room and how other people are responding when I'm around or to each other. Then I can start with relationship management, our fourth area. How am I managing the relationships in my, or what we like to call our sphere of influence, the people around us, the people we interact with, the people that know us, the people in our network? Relationship management. What am I doing about it? Do I understand what other people need? Do I understand their triggers? Do I understand what makes them happy, sad, mad, glad? And what am I doing about it? What am I committing to doing to make sure those relationships are as positive and enriching as possible and mutually beneficial? So those are the four areas. And I'm excited to talk about this in relation to marriage because sometimes, honestly, even when we come to know these concepts like emotional intelligence, we apply it at work, we apply it in our friendships. But other than God, our most important relationship is our marriage. So how are we playing this out in marriage? So Mike and Erica, thanks for joining us for this conversation. So now that we know a little bit about it, can you all start us off and talk a little bit about how each spouse in a marriage should build their own emotional intelligence? And then how do we best understand our spouse's EQ?
I think that was number one in our discussion last night. Like, a lot of times we place a lot of responsibility of my emotional health and my mental well-being on your spouse, when really it is my job to pull away, to unplug, to make sure I'm having my devotions with God, to make sure when I come to you, I know I'm not going to always be together. I can't tell that lie. But at least I have a general awareness of who I am, what triggers me, like you said, and what we can do about it. And I think that's something that's grown over the years. Ask us 15 years ago where we were. I mean, I feel like we were strangers. We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into, but we're here. God has blessed, madly in love. But this is definitely something that we've had to grow like a muscle over time.
Great.
Just going with that, I think there's a certain level of maturity too that emotional intelligence takes in order to be emotionally intelligent. I know usually when you first get married, there's a feeling of infatuation. I guess you're still in that phase where everything that person does. It's great. You overlook everything, but then it comes a point where reality kind of sinks in, and you're going through the day-to-day motions of life and marriage, and you may have kids, and then the things that really bother you start to manifest themselves, and then that's the time where you have to use the most emotional intelligence to be able to discern: is this the time? Like you said, reading the room and understanding. My spouse might need a break from me right now because she's having a moment or I'm having a moment. Let me withdraw myself from the situation. So I might not say something I might regret later, and it's not worth it. So I think that maturity first, that's the first step. Understanding, hey, let's not lead with our emotions. Let's pull back and think about it. And that will go a long way.
Great. I appreciate both of those responses. And to your point, I'm glad that you talked about the spectrum of the newlywed phase versus what happens over the years, because I think it's important. I think we can't just talk about marriage in one snapshot. It's a journey, right? And so we move from what Clamore said, cupcake to commitment, right? First we start on that cupcake phase and we're operating on sheer bliss. And then you say, okay, once certain things wear off, and that's not to say all of the love wears off, you still have warm and fuzzy moments over time, but there's a different level of commitment. Now I'm not just doing things out of convenience or out of feeling. I'm doing it because this is what I committed to doing, and I understand the importance. And then once you start operating in that space, then it brings you back to that lovey-dovey place again. Because if I'm committed and you're committed, then that's awesome. Were you going to add something to that, Clamore?
Yeah, you guys said something very beautifully. And one of the things I wanted to add is that for a lot of the couples who might find emotional intelligence to be a huge, big, broad thing, it's okay to not know what it is. Sometimes emotional intelligence has to be learned, and in this case, being taught. And so now we're going to give you the language to be able to grow in this stage of understanding what emotional intelligence is. And I say that to say that it's okay to not be emotionally intelligent right now. And the reason why I say it's okay is because, as Mike said earlier, it's a matter of maturity. You're going to mature into it, and you have to work, as Erica said, you have to recognize in yourself first what's going on, and then channel that with your spouse and grow together. It's a process of growing together. Sometimes you won't be able to do it by yourself because, like they used to say, other people know you better than you know yourself, because you're not really aware of the social awareness aspect of what your behaviors are doing to other people. But your spouse, the most intimate person next to you, will be able to help you recognize those cues as you guys grow together and mature together into that process. So it's okay to not be emotionally intelligent right now. You will grow into it as your marriage grows, which is why that cupcake phase to the commitment is so important. That transition, it's important for the marriage to grow strong.
And also, in thinking about marriage as a journey, I think it's so important to remember that you might have good self-awareness and maybe even good self-management, and leading into social awareness, but your spouse may still be at the stage of working on their self-awareness, which is to say everyone does not end up in the same phase at the same time. So this process, but all of marriage, requires patience, understanding, the understanding that just because I'm now working on my relationship management and I've checked off these other three, my spouse might not be there yet. And to Clamore's point, that's okay, but what are we going to do about it? How am I going to support them during their period of growth?
I like that. All right.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
All right, so let's jump into the next one. Let's talk about what low EQ looks like in marriage. In the medical field, they'll say, how does this present when you have a problem? How does it present? When you have low EQ, let's talk about how that presents in marriage. So we'll kick that one off, and you guys can ask us, any follow-up questions on that. I think when someone has low EQ, especially in relation to self-awareness, they might blow up about something or get really upset without ever stopping to think about the why. And I think the why is important. It's okay that everyone gets disappointed at some point, but I think we need to think about the why. So people just kind of flying off the handle without ever stopping to say, how did I get here? I think that's one of the ways that low EQ presents.
Yeah, I agree. It's important to find out why certain things bother you. People get bothered, like Kasha said, all the time about things, but they don't know why or where it's coming from. It could be things from your childhood, could be friendships or relationship, different relationships in your life, your environment. There's so many different factors that affect, the self-awareness.
Very good. Did you want to add to that? Ask some follow-up questions.
We just wanted to share a quick story. As we were talking about this, what came to our minds. So several years ago, we had our daughter Eden. I think she was about 2.5, 3 years old. We were ready to try again. We thought it was an automatic, hey, I'm ready. Let's go. Let's do this. But it wasn't so automatic with us. We ended up having a miscarriage after our first daughter was born. And I was devastated. I mean, nobody in my family had ever had one. I didn't understand what happened. I blamed myself for so many things. And so we were just in the car one day talking. And then Michael says to me, Erica, I don't see what the big deal is. And
he didn't say it like that.
He didn't say it like
I mean, he was slower. It was slower. I don't see what the big deal
is. Because that was several years ago, I can't really speak to what was actually said. As I don't know if that's a quote verbatim, but it was to that effect. So, however, like I said earlier, when we talk about emotional intelligence being tied and linked to maturity, I think that was a matter of an immature statement. I didn't read the room. I didn't understand because I'm a man, so I didn't understand the bond or the connection that a woman who's carrying a child has. It was different for me. That loss that we experienced felt differently than how she felt.
Oh yeah.
And so I didn't know how to articulate that. I know she was kind of saddened by that and getting depressed. So I'm trying to, in my little weird way, I'm trying to pick her up. It's not that big a deal, we can try again. But I don't think it came across the right way.
But it was such a vulnerable moment. I think we both can look back on it and say, man, God used that situation to bring us closer together, because I appreciated you. And of course, maybe it didn't come out so great out of your mouth, but I appreciate your innocence in it and just wanting to understand, like, okay, let me climb into the hole with you. Let me see how you feel, where you are. And I think that's kind of where our emotional intelligence kind of started to turn and churn for the better, because, maybe you're not here, you're not in my body. But man, I think from that point on, you did a wonderful job understanding, just being there with me as we both experienced that loss. So that's just what came to our attention when we're thinking about emotional intelligence.
Yeah, that empathy is so important, man, in that growth. Good job, Mike. Like you, man, I've had to come back around years later to apologize about some things that I did because of my immaturity that had some lasting effects later on.
Yeah.
Created some scars emotionally. And to remedy that, it's very important. Like, guys, it's very important to acknowledge the emotional hurt of your spouse.
Oh yeah.
It's very important, because those emotional wounds it's more important to acknowledge those than you think. It will change a lot of the interaction between you and your spouse. As time goes along, it'll open up more doors for you when you develop that social awareness to be able to recognize, something about my wife is off right now.
Oh yeah.
And I need to understand what it is. You need to develop a curious nature about your wife's emotional intelligence, because the so-called nagging is not it's not an intentional thing to drive you nuts. It's because you're missing some certain information that she's trying to convey that you don't understand.
And to the point about maturity, even though we're talking about God, maturity takes place on both sides, right? Yes. So in that scenario, and also in what I'm going to share.
I'm talking about my experience right now.
So it takes on both sides. So on the one hand, for example, a guy in this scenario might have to understand, man, okay, my wife has a certain need, and I didn't address all of it. I understood some of what she was going through. I could sympathize, but I wasn't really empathizing. A guy might have to acknowledge, I don't feel the same things. Erica's beautiful point, as women, as wives, sometimes we have to say, you know what, I have to give grace, because there's no way he could have felt that. He can't physically carry with you. He could feel some things. He's hurt as a father. He has his own journey with this miscarriage as a father, but he can never have mine, and I can't hold that against him. So I have to understand the place he came from when he said it. And I've had to go through that, giving grace as well. I remember when we had our first son, I had kind of a crazy hospital experience. It was different than what we first thought. There were a couple of complications, and thankfully the baby was okay, but there were some complications in the hospital experience, and it was very painful for me. So one day there was myself, another mother, maybe one or two other mothers sitting around talking, and I didn't share this experience with everyone, but it was at least a person that we cared about that I might have shared some of the journey with, because they asked me very genuinely, hey, how are you doing? How did everything go with your process? And I was to the point where I could have been like, oh, let me tell you what happened. And in that moment, while Clamore could have been like, you know what? These are moms. Let me just step out of this. Clamore was like, it was great. Man, we breezed through it. It was perfect. Went off without a hit. And I was like, are you really, did we? And he was like, I mean, there was no pain. Quick.
Never speak for a woman's
someone else's experience. Someone else's experience. He was like, and they said, well, how was your recovery time? Clamore was like, healed quickly. She was running up and downstairs, jogging a couple weeks later. Baby's good. She's good. And I was seething, because in that moment, it wasn't just about the response. It was the fact that, number one, you took away the opportunity for me to tell my own journey, but also that is not what I experienced. So to the part about self-awareness, and recognizing your spouse's triggers and their self-management, I had to think, okay, this is triggering, but what am I going to do about it? This is triggering, but again, I have to give grace. That was his experience in it. And because we are one, we both had a great birth. So, but the social awareness would have helped. Like, read the room. If there are mothers talking about their birthday, let me just not say it.
Right.
Well, we've all grown from that.
Great example.
That's good stuff.
So to my initial point, sometimes growing EQ, let's not say low EQ, but developing EQ can look like not reading the room well, but also speaking for someone else's experience that may not either be true for them, and it's different from your own.
And also, a big thing that I learned from that experience after we spoke about that
in
years
the car
later,
on the way home.
Spouses altogether need to understand, but more so I think for women in different stages of their lives as they experience different things, is that, and I'm only going to speak to the husbands right now, is that it's very important for your wife to be seen. And when I say to be seen, an acknowledgement of the experience, so she does not feel like she's in this situation alone. It's a delicate, it may seem like, what is that? But it's more impactful to them than it seems. And what I learned from that is I took away that opportunity for her to be seen amongst those other women. It's a huge chunk of something that I took away from her that was very much needed, especially after I understood the experiences that she had to go through in that environment.
We've grown from that. We've grown.
So have we.
Oh, yes. That conversation never happened again. More be like, ask Kasha. I wouldn't even.
I hear you.
I was like, thank you.
Even if she's jogging and she's still recovering, I'm just like,
let her tell it.
Ask her. Very good.
Yes. Do you guys want to throw out the next question? I know I asked the next one, and we can both take it.
It says,
what impact what impact can your EQ have on your sphere of influence as a couple?
Woohoo.
I think starting from that example and going out from there. So think about the people that you are either most often around, that are most influential in your marriage, that you influence the most as a couple. That relationship management is important. And even though emotional intelligence starts with self awareness, as a couple, a lot of times you have to do joint relationship management.
Mm.
So the relationships that we have with people. Yes, we have our own perspective sometimes. Maybe I knew someone first, Clemore knew someone first, but as a couple, our social awareness and where we're together and how we have to read a room has to be really aligned in the way we manage those relationships. I can't feel really strongly about one kind of relationship and Clemore feels strongly in the other direction. We have to talk about those reasons why and decide how we're going to continue to build our social awareness when we're together and how we manage those relationships. So that's the first thing that I'll say. For instance, in that example, Clemore might say, you know what, social awareness, let me let these women speak for a minute, or let me just let them have their experience. But all together, if there's a lot of couples talking, making sure we're both giving space for the men to share their experiences and the women to share their experiences, and that we're both listening. Interesting fact about us, because Clemore is in behavioral health and psych, and I'm in human resources and training and development. Every time we kind of debrief an interesting situation, like say we were together in a group, maybe pre-COVID, but say we were together with some couples, I usually start by saying, Clemore, did you hear what so-and-so said? Did you hear the way they said it? Did you hear what they brought up about so-and-so? And Clemore always leads with, but did you see their behaviors when they so-and-so? And did you see their behaviors? He always looks at what people do, and I listen to what people say. And so together, it makes a very interesting perspective when we talk about how we're going to manage, relationships in our sphere of influence.
Interestingly, for us also, it's for our kids, for people who have kids. Your your level of EQ will determine how your children will respond in the future, because they're watching our interactions. And I always say this in every environment I go to, or even on here, if I have the opportunity, your kids see everything, they hear everything ever since they were inside the mother's womb. Their senses are working and they're soaking everything up. So in our situation, there are moments where, I'll say certain things and Kasha's like, babe, how you said that makes, our oldest, because he's a words of affirmation kid. How I say certain things, will either put a smile on his face or make him frown. Most of the times I'm just like, no, I focus on what I do for him versus what I say. And it's important to in that emotional intelligence format, it's important to be aware, for me to be aware of what I'm saying. That's part of my self-management, the impact of that. So negatively, if I continue, for example, we want our son to always be honest, right? So my response to him when he does something wrong, if I'm inquiring of a situation that he's done, how I ask that question will determine if he's going to answer me or not. If he's not if I don't create an environment that he's comfortable in to tell the truth, he won't say it. Then he'll just start making up stories because he might be scared. So that's kind of an example of how, having my own self-management and then the social awareness, how it affects, my influence with the kids, but also even for other adults, around us, our interaction with other adults. Some people may not like how I respond or understand who I am. Like, I'm an introvert. If I'm not talking, it's not because, I'm I don't want to talk to you is like, I just don't have that much to say.
Okay. Good.
I stored up all my reserves to be here. Otherwise, I'll just be.
I'm right there with you, Clamore. I'm right there with you.
Really? Is that true about you too, Erica?
Mm-hmm.
Introverts unite.
Introverts unite.
Oh yeah.
In your own place, at your own house.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. But with this question, we had to think about, like, really, are other couples looking at us? And absolutely they are. And we think because we haven't been in the game for as long as others have, but man, you have a huge influence. And I think of all of the couples that God blessed us to know, your parents, my parents, like, it wasn't easy, but they stuck together. And I never saw your mom just loud and irate at your dad, like, and right. My parents, my mother either. And so it's such a blessing. But we know that everybody doesn't have the opportunity. So we've been blessed. I think, a lot of times back in the day, I used to, even around your family, I would kind of use every opportunity to kind of talk bad about you, to kind of complain. And like, who benefits from that? Like, so I had to learn myself to scan the room, leave my complaints for our private, conversations. And we've come a long way. But yeah, you have a huge sphere of influence. And I'd agree with what you were saying, Clamore, with our children. Like, just a couple of days ago, we had like a blowout with Mike and I. Like, it was a heated argument. And we had to go back and we had to take each child and call them into the room and say, hey, you know what? We made a huge mistake. And this is where mommy was wrong. This is where daddy was wrong. And in the future, this is what we would want you to do with this conversation. Or if this ever happened to you, this is how you should deal with it. Each kid, 4 times, apologies. And so don't think that you have to have it all together. But I pray that God bless that. And of course, I pray that they would mirror or have a marriage like ours or their grandparents or whatever. But yeah.
I love
what you said. Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say was another thing. Like, I'm a person that, if there's a situation, I want to address it right there. And I had to learn and understand that in public, talking about our sphere of influence.
Oh yeah.
Some conversations with your spouse, you just leave.
Oh yeah.
At home and in private. Because I'm like, I don't want to leave it till later and have the conversation. I want to settle it right now, solve the issue right now. And I'm not being aware of my social influence in that moment, because it could be something that upsets me, and I may be responding in a certain way to my wife that other people might view as, I don't want to speak how other people may view it.
Right.
People will develop their own interpretation. Yeah. And so that's a reflection of our marriage that may be false, because people are taken out of context what's happening just in the moment, know? So yeah, that just came to my mind when you were mentioning that, Erica.
This is great conversation, because when we talk about sphere of influence, we do have to remember it includes our children and the context they experience the world. So they're not just hearing what we're saying, they are learning conflict resolution. They're learning appropriate dialogue. They're learning inappropriate dialogue. They're learning whatever we tell them. They're not just hearing the words. They are actually, the bigger context is they're looking at how they will handle it in the future, or some basis for how they could handle it going forward. And so I love that you all circled back, because we know that intense fellowship happens, right? But what we do about it, that going back and saying, you know what, that did happen, yes. So that admission and that saying, you know what, but here's what I hope you would do. Here's what I hope your takeaway from is, I want you to know I love your father, your mother. That is so important. And kids will learn from that, now that they know, okay, yes, things happen. Let me not go through life thinking things don't happen. They do in marriage. But here's, how we can grow from that. I love that. And I think that's absolutely amazing.
Yeah. And that it's okay to say, I'm sorry.
But also with other couples, we had to realize, so our marriage, although we like to think, our marriage is our own, it is, but it's not. So it is a whole resource dedicated to God, rededicated to God. It was his, right? If we believe God brought us together, we are responsible for that, right? We made a commitment in front of bridesmaids, groomsmen, the pastor of the community, and we asked people to surround us, and we told them, hey, we're going to be together. Please give us your prayers and support. And so we do have an obligation to God to, about how we handle conflict, how we love each other, how we raise our children to be productive members of society. And so EQ, our self-management, what we do about our triggers is so important. Give yourself the grace that you will have triggers, but what we do about it is important.
Awesome.
All right. So final question, and we can each take this. What is our, and I talked about this a little bit, so I'll let you guys go first, but what is our spiritual responsibility? Because we know that marriage is a God-given institution. What is our spiritual responsibility in relation to emotional intelligence?
Well, we talked about this last night, and that's just given the example of Jesus when he was on this earth. He exhibited a lot of emotional intelligence when he interacted with people that were falsely accusing him, people that were calling him all types of names, things that didn't match up with who he was as a person. Even when he got angry and when he went into the temple to cleanse the temple, he still exhibited a lot of emotional intelligence. So you could be passionate about your emotions and how you feel, but taking it to the extreme and crossing a boundary that even Christ himself, who's worthy to do what he needs to do on this earth, didn't cross certain boundaries. And so just having that as an example and knowing, hey, I'm upset with my wife right now. She's made me mad. She's getting on my nerves. But there are boundaries that we are confined as Christians, especially if we're to be examples to our children and others. So you may be so upset that you may want to use explicitives and curse words, but that may not be a boundary as a Christian that you may want to go down that avenue. You may want to say something that you may regret in the future because they hurt you, you want to hurt them back. But then you're bound by the boundaries because you're a Christian and your faith causes you to rise above that. So just knowing that, and then allowing your partner to have, your spouse to have a place of retreat also. So emotional intelligence works both ways, like you were saying earlier. If you're feeling antagonized and then your spouse is following you around, see, I bet you're not going to do nothing. And you have to allow, so it takes two people to use emotional intelligence when you're dealing with conflict resolution. Allow your spouse a time. Clamore was saying that he wants to deal with it right now because I'm upset. Let's address it right now. No, give your spouse some time to process and retreat, regroup, and then come back and have a more sound conversation at the end. I think that's
I do a lot of reading the room with Michael. So I don't want to call it tiptoeing, but I'm always reading. Okay, so how is he feeling? What is he going through right now? How did that meeting just go with his job? Like, does he need a moment? Like, yesterday, my son, he was in training all morning, Michael. And so he finally goes outside to do something with the chickens. And so my thought first is, okay, Mike, you go outside and be with daddy. This is your turn to go be trained by your father. But then I had to think to myself, no, he's been in meetings all morning. He probably wants time to himself. So I said, Mike, you can go out there, but you got to leave daddy alone. You got to get space to kind of retreat. And so to me, that is, it's a lot of self-sacrificing. Like, yeah, I would like to have a house full of no children right now. But how's my husband feeling? What does he need from us right now? And second, I feel like my spiritual responsibility is to just lean on Christ in everything. Because if it was up to me, we would fail all the time. But God, let me lean on you. Let me act as if you would act, and let me read your word and reflect on it and hope that my behavior, oh Lord, will change for the better. And so that's what's happened. I like to think of, in the airplane, you're like, put your mask on first. And I believe when you lean on Christ, it's a way of, hey, you're putting on your mask first so that you can be filled with your husband and you can interact with your children in a positive way. And so that's what I like to focus on. I'm going to go outside, even if it's 30 degrees, I'm going to go outside for myself for 30 minutes so that I can get my mind together. And I think that's my spiritual responsibility. The house is a lot calmer when I do that. And it's a trigger when I don't. So we've learned.
Man, that's powerful,
That's
Erica.
deep.
And I was going to share something that went along with what you said. When I think about our spiritual responsibility, it's regarding each other's needs above our own.
Mm.
Right? That's the first thing. And you talked about that in moments where, even if it is time for the kids to be with one parent or the other, reading the room and saying, you know what, Mike might need this, Clamore might need this, because I resonate with a lot of what you were saying and have a similar experience. I'll have to say, nope, not yet, because Clamore might need this to recharge, and then we'll try to get back on track. Sometimes many days, might go in different directions than a parent thinks, but it's about understanding what the other person needs and what we like to call, and putting people in environments where they can be their best. So my prayer is that I can always put Clamore and my children in environments where they can be their best, and that also they would be thinking about me to allow me the space and time and environment to be my best and give me tools and resources to be my best. So regarding each other's needs above our own. And then to something Mike said, I know you were talking about boundaries in a way that keep us in a certain realm so that we can operate to our fullest potential as spouses. But I want to add to that perspective too, that even James talks about the perfect law of truth that gives us freedom.
Right.
So a lot of times we think about boundaries as restrictive. I think about them as saying you can do whatever you want to do in this space. It's really freeing. It's saying if you stay within this, you'll be safe. If you stay within this boundary, you're less likely to have intense fellowship. If you stay within this space, you can X, Y, and Z. So I'm at a place in life where I'm trying to reframe my thinking. Boundaries are important, but they're not only restrictive, they are liberating. James talks about, the law of the laws that give us freedom, the biblical laws. So
it's kind of like walking in a bubble. You have that boundary, but you're still free to move around anywhere you're going. You just have that knowledge boundary of what you can do. I agree, with what Kasha was just saying. We have a phrase that we always say: service prevents selfishness. And being willing, having a willingness to serve, I believe, is a part of our spiritual excuse me, our spiritual responsibility to God, and of course to our spouse. And Jesus, he demonstrated that a lot. He met people where they were. He saw what people were going through, and he acknowledged that. He also had enough self-awareness of when he was getting to his tipping point, where it says, he will get up late at night or early in the morning and go pray by himself to prepare himself for the work that he was going to do. So it's very important, like Erica was saying earlier, leaning on Christ, taking that, I would add on to that, taking that one-on-one time with God before your day begins, before you go into a situation, before you have a conversation with your spouse. Pray in that moment and ask the Holy Spirit to lead that conversation
and lead and guide you into all truth also.
Right. And so I think it's really important to follow Christ's example and know that it's okay to have these emotions. Just state them. And the way you state them is very important. Sometimes you may need to ask your wife, how do you best receive your spouse. You may need to ask your spouse, how do you best receive information? How do you want me to present when something is bothering you? Or when do you want me to present it?
Leave nothing to chance. Ask.
Right. Ask all the time. Like Kasha, part of her social awareness was she recognized that after a certain length of time, she could see in my eyes that I've checked out in a conversation. And so she's implemented, okay, babe, I have a 2-minute vent. And she'll go for 2 minutes. I have a time frame. Babe, I have a 20-second vent.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Doesn't never happen, but she still gets the time limit.
Oh,
but
we didn't hear that.
Thank you. So that he knows it has a start and stop.
It knows that right. And so it's very freeing, those boundaries, they're very freeing. So I think that is another part of our spiritual responsibility is acknowledging that time together is important. That's how you are able, that quality time with your spouse and with Christ, having devotional together, praying together. Those things help us build our emotional intelligence.
Cool. Well, we appreciate this great conversation with you guys. And as we wrap this session up, we're going to throw out a challenge for those of you listening. Think again about your self-awareness, your self-management, your social awareness, and your relationship management, and pick one of the areas that you would like to start focusing on immediately, that you say, hey, maybe I'm self-aware, but I really need to work on my social awareness. Or maybe I'm doing pretty good with self-management, but I want to work on my relationship management. And find an EQ mentor, someone that can give you good feedback in that area. Maybe it's your spouse. Maybe you need to bounce ideas off of someone else as well that you rely on. But start focusing on one of those areas and see how you can begin to develop. And there's a great book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. You can check that out. They actually give you some recommendations in each of the areas to try, and you can choose one or more of those things. So check out that resource. But Mike and Erica, as always, thank you all for joining us. Great conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so
we
much.
Enjoyed
it's been an honor. Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good one.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.